Jimin's raw scream during rehearsal halts everything. What did Jungkook do to provoke such a reaction? Staff and cameras caught everything uncensored. "Don't touch me again, Jungkook." Jimin's voice cracked the studio air like glass under pressure. Every head turned, every camera rolled. The lights were bright, too bright. A white-hot glare reflected off the glossy floor of the Hybe rehearsal studio, casting long shadows behind the boys who had been dancing for hours. Sweat clung to their necks, trickling down spines, soaking into the loose fabric of oversized shirts. But the heat in the room had nothing to do with the lights. "Cut the music." A voice, hoarse and low, sliced through the pounding bass. The beat died mid-bar, echoing awkwardly into silence. Jungkook's hand had barely grazed Jimin's wrist, just a guide, a small gesture meant to reset their synchronized movement. But the reaction it provoked was volcanic. "Don't touch me again, Jungkook," Jimin snapped, stepping back, his chest heaving. His voice wasn't just loud, it was blistering, loaded with something darker, deeper. Every eye in the room widened. The choreographer froze mid-note. One of the backup dancers' mouths hung open, still panting from exertion. And behind the mirrored wall, 3 camera operators didn't even blink. They knew better than to stop rolling. Jungkook's hand hovered mid-air, now trembling slightly. He blinked. Once. Twice. "Jimin, I was just—" "No," Jimin cut him off. "You were just doing what you always do. Controlling, fixing, acting like you know better than anyone else." Silence clung to the walls like mold. Namjoon stepped forward instinctively, but Yoongi held his arm back. "Let it happen," he murmured under his breath. Eyes locked on the scene unfolding. Jimin's breath shook as he turned away, wiping sweat from his brow. Though it was clearly not just exertion that glistened in his eyes. He gritted his teeth, and for a moment, his reflection in the mirror didn't even look like him. The camera zoomed in. No one told it to. It just knew. "Do you think I don't see what you're doing?" Jimin asked without turning. His voice was softer now, but laced with venom. "You think I'm fragile, that I need to be handled like glass. But I'm not your responsibility, Jungkook." Jungkook lowered his hands slowly. His jaw tightened. His voice caught somewhere between defense and devastation. "I don't think you're fragile," he whispered. But it didn't matter. Jimin had already stormed off the floor. The sound of his footsteps echoed like gunshots in the wide, echoing space. A door slammed. And still, the cameras rolled. One of the production assistants finally exhaled. Someone else muttered, "Did that really just happen?" Namjoon stepped into the center of the room, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He looked like he had aged 10 years and 30 seconds. "Break. Everyone, take 10. The team dispersed slowly, murmuring, eyes following Jungkook as he remained frozen in place. Outside, Jimin leaned against the wall, trying to slow the hurricane behind his ribcage. His hands trembled, not because of Jungkook's touch, not really, but because it brought something back, something he had buried, something he swore he'd never let rise again. And Jungkook, poor, stupid Jungkook, had touched the fault line. Jimin closed his eyes and saw a memory he had tried to forget. Fluorescent lights, sterile air, the feel of a needle in his arm, and someone gripping his wrist too tightly as he cried silently. Jungkook had no idea. But he should have. Inside the room, Jungkook finally moved. He walked to the mirror, staring into his reflection. His hair was damp, his eyes darker than usual. He looked at the version of himself staring back, confused, hurt, but mostly lost. Had he crossed a boundary he didn't know existed? Or was Jimin projecting something deeper, something not even Jungkook could fix? He replayed the moment in his head. The step, the spin, the misalignment. He'd reached out instinctively. He always did that. They were partners, weren't they? They had always danced as one. But today, something broke. And it wasn't just the routine. Down the hallway, behind a door with a sign that read, "Private, do not disturb," Jimin sat curled on a couch, his palms pressed hard into his eyes. Taehyung entered without knocking. He always did. He didn't say anything at first, just sat beside Jimin, their shoulders touching. After a long pause, Taehyung asked, "You want to talk about it?" Jimin shook his head. "Okay," Taehyung whispered, accepting the silence. But Jimin's voice cracked through it a moment later. "It's happening again, Tae. I thought I was past this." Taehyung didn't ask what this meant. He already knew. The flashbacks. The panic. The way a touch could feel like a blade. "You're not weak," he said softly. Jimin exhaled, broken. "Then why do I feel like I'm shattering all over again?" Back in the studio, staff murmured in corners. Some speculated it was a fight. Others suspected exhaustion. A few had darker theories. And all the while, the footage was being backed up automatically to the cloud. Uncut. Unfiltered. Someone, somewhere, was already clipping the audio. "Don't touch me again, Jungkook." The rawness of it. The crack in Jimin's voice. The way Jungkook flinched. None of it could be unseen. Not anymore. And the question now wasn't whether they'd finish the rehearsal. It was whether they'd survive what came next. Not just as performers, but as people, as brothers, as two souls connected by too much pain, too much past, and a bond that might finally be unraveling under the weight of their unspoken truths. That was the moment everything began to fall apart. And no one, not even the cameras, was prepared for what it would reveal. Jimin's raw scream during rehearsal halts everything. What did Jungkook do to provoke such a reaction? Staff and cameras caught everything uncensored. "Don't touch me again, Jungkook." Jimin's voice cracked the studio air like glass under pressure. Every head turned, every camera rolled. The lights were bright, too bright. A white-hot glare reflected off the glossy floor of the Hybe rehearsal studio, casting long shadows behind the boys who had been dancing for hours. Sweat clung to their necks, trickling down spines, soaking into the loose fabric of oversized shirts. But the heat in the room had nothing to do with the lights. "Cut the music." A voice, hoarse and low, sliced through the pounding bass. The beat died mid-bar, echoing awkwardly into silence. Jungkook's hand had barely grazed Jimin's wrist, just a guide, a small gesture meant to reset their synchronized movement. But the reaction it provoked was volcanic. "Don't touch me again, Jungkook," Jimin snapped, stepping back, his chest heaving. His voice wasn't just loud, it was blistering, loaded with something darker, deeper. Every eye in the room widened. The choreographer froze mid-note. One of the backup dancers' mouths hung open, still panting from exertion. And behind the mirrored wall, 3 camera operators didn't even blink. They knew better than to stop rolling. Jungkook's hand hovered midair, now trembling slightly. He blinked. Once. Twice. "Jimin, I was just—" "No." Jimin cut him off. "You were just doing what you always do. Controlling. Fixing. Acting like you know better than anyone else." Silence clung to the walls like mold. Namjoon stepped forward instinctively, but Yoongi held his arm back. "Let it happen," he murmured under his breath, eyes locked on the scene unfolding. Jimin's breath shook as he turned away, wiping sweat from his brow, though it was clearly not just exertion that glistened in his eyes. He gritted his teeth, and for a moment, his reflection in the mirror didn't even look like him. The camera zoomed in. No one told it to. It just knew. "Do you think I don't see what you're doing?" Jimin asked without turning. His voice was softer now, but laced with venom. "You think I'm fragile, that I need to be handled like glass. But I'm not your responsibility, Jungkook." Jungkook lowered his hand slowly. His jaw tightened. His voice caught somewhere between defense and devastation. "I don't think you're fragile," he whispered. But it didn't matter. Jimin had already stormed off the floor. The sound of his footsteps echoed like gunshots in the wide, echoing space. A door slammed. And still, the cameras rolled. One of the production assistants finally exhaled. Someone else muttered, "Did that really just happen?" Namjoon stepped into the center of the room, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 30 seconds. "Break. Everyone. Take 10. The team dispersed slowly, murmuring, eyes following Jungkook as he remained frozen in place. Outside, Jimin leaned against the wall, trying to slow the hurricane behind his ribcage. His hands trembled, not because of Jungkook's touch, not really, but because it brought something back. Something he had buried, something he swore he'd never let rise again. And Jungkook, poor, stupid Jungkook, had touched the fault line. Jimin closed his eyes and saw a memory he had tried to forget. Fluorescent lights, sterile air, the feel of a needle in his arm, and someone gripping his wrist too tightly as he cried silently. Jungkook had no idea. But he should have. Inside the room, Jungkook finally moved. He walked to the mirror, staring into his reflection. His hair was damp, his eyes darker than usual. He looked at the version of himself staring back, confused, hurt, but mostly lost. Had he crossed a boundary he didn't know existed? Or was Jimin projecting something deeper, something not even Jungkook could fix? He replayed the moment in his head. The step, the spin, the misalignment. He'd reached out instinctively. He always did that. They were partners, weren't they? They had always danced as one. But today, something broke. And it wasn't just the routine. Down the hallway, behind a door, with a sign that read "Private, Do Not Disturb," Jimin sat curled on a couch, his palms pressed hard into his eyes. Taehyung entered without knocking. He always did. He didn't say anything at first, just sat beside Jimin, their shoulders touching. After a long pause, Taehyung asked, "You want to talk about it?" Jimin shook his head. "Okay," Taehyung whispered, accepting the silence. But Jimin's voice cracked through it a moment later. "It's happening again, Tae. I thought I was past this." Taehyung didn't ask what this meant. He already knew. The flashbacks, the panic, the way a touch could feel like a blade. "You're not weak," he said softly. Jimin exhaled, broken. "Then why do I feel like I'm shattering all over again?" Back in the studio, staff murmured in corners. Some speculated it was a fight. Others suspected exhaustion. A few had darker theories. And all the while, the footage was being backed up automatically to the cloud. Uncut, unfiltered. Someone, somewhere, was already clipping the audio. "Don't touch me again, Jungkook." The rawness of it, the crack in Jimin's voice, the way Jungkook flinched. None of it could be unseen. Not anymore. And the question now wasn't whether they'd finish the rehearsal. It was whether they'd survive what came next. Not just as performers, but as people, as brothers. As two souls connected by too much pain, too much past, and a bond that might finally be unraveling under the weight of their unspoken truths. That was the moment everything began to fall apart. And no one, not even the cameras, was prepared for what it would reveal. "Say something, Jungkook. Anything. Because your silence is louder than your apology could ever be." The lights were off in the studio now, but the tension remained, thick and suffocating like smoke that refused to disperse. The crew had packed up early, murmuring about the scene they'd witnessed, their eyes darting. Unsure of what lines had been crossed, professional, personal, or both. No one knew for certain what had cracked between Jimin and Jungkook. All they knew was that something did, and it was loud, public, and deeply, painfully real. Jungkook sat alone on the edge of the rehearsal platform, his elbows on his knees, head hung low, hands knotted together. He hadn't moved in nearly an hour. The others had come and gone, unsure whether to talk to him or let him sit in the stillness he seemed to crave. But silence doesn't mend broken things. It only preserves their shape long enough to rot beneath the surface. Footsteps approached. They were soft, measured, but unafraid. "You look like shit," Yoongi said flatly, dropping onto the floor next to Jungkook. Jungkook didn't laugh, didn't even smile. He barely blinked. Yoongi sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You gonna talk, or should I just throw you a pity party in silence?" Jungkook's voice was hoarse when it finally came. "I didn't mean to hurt him." "I know," Yoongi replied. "But you did." "I didn't know." "I don't know what I did." Yoongi leaned back on his hands, gazing at the ceiling. "That's the thing about pain. It doesn't always come from what you did. Sometimes it's about what they carry. And you, kid, stepped on a landmine." Jungkook exhaled sharply. "I was just trying to help." "Then maybe you should have asked what kind of help he needed," Yoongi said, "instead of assuming you knew. I've always been there for him." Yoongi finally turned to look at him, his gaze sharp. "Exactly. Always. Even when he didn't ask. Even when he needed space. You've been his shadow, his crutch, his savior. And maybe, Jungkook, he doesn't want saving. Maybe he just wants to be seen." Jungkook looked away. "He said I was controlling." "Are you?" Yoongi asked bluntly. Jungkook swallowed hard. "I don't know anymore." Silence stretched between them, thick and raw. Somewhere down the hall, the sound of a door slamming echoed faintly. Meanwhile, Jimin was curled on the floor of the recording booth, knees pulled to his chest, eyes fixed on the monitor in front of him. He had pulled up the security footage frame by frame. He watched his own face twist with rage and pain. Watched Jungkook recoil like he'd been slapped. Watched the moment it all broke. The worst part wasn't what happened. It was that he didn't regret it. He'd been on edge for weeks, no, months. The pressure, the expectations, the unspoken weight between them. Jungkook's gaze had grown too sharp, his touch too present, his presence too constant. It wasn't love. Not anymore. It was suffocation. He heard the door open behind him. Taehyung stepped in, carrying a coffee cup and something that looked like resolve. "I brought you this," Taehyung said quietly, placing the drink beside Jimin. Jimin didn't respond. Taehyung sat down next to him. "You're watching it again." Jimin nodded slowly. "I want to remember exactly how it felt." "Why?" Taehyung asked. "Because for once, I didn't swallow it down. I didn't smile and nod and pretend everything was fine." His voice shook. "I screamed, Tae! I finally screamed." Taehyung looked at him, eyes soft. "You're allowed to, but you also need to face what comes after the scream." Jimin's eyes flicked to him. "And what's that?" "The silence. And then, the consequences." Jimin leaned back against the wall. "Do you think I was too harsh?" Taehyung hesitated. "No. I think you were honest. But honesty doesn't make it hurt less for either of you." There was a knock on the glass door. Both of them turned. Jungkook stood outside, hands in his pockets. Eyes hollow, Taehyung glanced at Jimin. "Want me to stay?" Jimin didn't answer. Taehyung nodded once, then got up and opened the door. "Be gentle," he muttered to Jungkook as he passed. Now it was just the two of them. Jungkook stepped inside slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. "I didn't want it to go like this." Jimin didn't move. "I didn't know it would trigger you." Still, no response. Jungkook's jaw tightened. "Do you really think I was trying to control you?" Finally, Jimin stood up, eyes sharp. "Yes." The word hit Jungkook like a fist. Jimin stepped closer, chest rising and falling rapidly. "You think being there for me means making decisions for me? Guiding me? Correcting me? You think loving someone means fixing them? But I'm not broken, Jungkook." "I never said you were," he whispered. "But you acted like it," Jimin snapped. "Ever since last year, when I broke down in that dressing room, you've treated me like I'm made of glass. You talk for me, decide for me, dance around me like I'm some fragile doll." "You were broken!" Jungkook shouted, his voice cracking. "I watched you fall apart and I didn't know what to do." "So, you decided to be my savior?" Jimin shot back. "You took my agency, my voice, everything, because you thought you knew best. That's not love. That's control." Jungkook's eyes filled with tears. He refused to let fall. "I just wanted to protect you." Jimin's voice softened, but it was no less fierce. "Then protect me by stepping back. Protect me by trusting that I can survive without you holding my hand." The air between them shimmered with something unsaid, something heavier than rage. Grief. Grief for the bond they once had, for the love that had twisted into something possessive, poisoned by good intentions. Jungkook took a trembling breath. "Do you still want me in your life?" Jimin closed his eyes. "I don't know," he whispered. The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was mournful. A silence of endings, of unsaid goodbyes. Jungkook nodded slowly. "Okay." He walked out, each step echoing like the last beats of a song once beautiful, now too painful to hear. Jimin sank back onto the couch. He didn't cry. He'd cried enough. Instead, he closed the video feed, shut the monitor off, and let darkness settle around him like a blanket of truth. Outside the studio, news had begun to spread. A staffer had leaked the footage just a few seconds, blurry but damning. Jimin's scream, the crack in his voice, the look on Jungkook's face. Twitter exploded. Fans speculated. Factions formed. Some blamed Jungkook, citing his intensity, his perfectionism. Others defended him, saying Jimin had always been too emotional. Hybe released a statement, short and clinical. "An incident occurred during rehearsal. The members are currently resolving it internally." But it was too late. The internet had already drawn its conclusions. Taehyung sat in his apartment, scrolling through his phone with growing fury. "This is getting out of hand," he muttered. He picked up his phone and called Jimin. No answer. Then he called Jungkook, straight to voicemail. Taehyung slammed his phone down. "Idiots," he whispered. "You're both going to destroy each other." Meanwhile, Yoongi paced his living room. He wasn't scrolling, he was reading. Reading comments, posts, fan theories, articles dissecting every facial twitch from the leaked footage. He closed the laptop and stared into the dark. They were all unraveling. And unless something changed, something real, this wouldn't just be a personal rupture. It would be the beginning of the end. Of BTS. Of brotherhood. Of everything they had built with blood and years and music. Jungkook sat in his apartment, staring at the wall, still in his rehearsal clothes. His phone buzzed non-stop. Messages from friends, managers, fans, even his own mother. He didn't open any of them. His mind echoed with one phrase, over and over. Don't touch me again, Jungkook. He hadn't just touched Jimin's wrist. He had touched something deeper, something sacred, and he had shattered it. Jimin lay in bed, eyes open in the dark, heart hammering in a slow, painful rhythm. He had never screamed like that before, not even when he had been hurting the most. But he had needed to. He had needed to. Now all that remained was the aftermath, the wreckage, and the choice they would both have to make alone, for once. Whether to rebuild, or to let it all burn. Because sometimes, love isn't enough. Sometimes, survival means walking away from the person who swore they'd never let you fall. Even when they meant well. Even when you loved them too. Especially then. Because the deepest wounds don't come from enemies. They come from the hands that once held you. And sometimes, the only way to heal is to let go. Say it to my face, Jungkook. Not behind cameras. Not behind silence. Say it right here. Say what you've been thinking all this time. Jimin's voice thundered across the corridor, slicing through the early morning air like a lightning strike without warning. The sun hadn't even risen fully over Seoul yet, and the high building stood like a dormant volcano, quiet on the outside, boiling within. The silence inside the complex was deceiving. A fragile peace just moments away from eruption. Jungkook stopped walking. He didn't turn around right away. The hallway lights flickered faintly above him, throwing fractured shadows across the wall. The air was stale, but charged. A hallway that had seen years of shared laughter, choreographed breakthroughs, late-night exhaustion, and quiet reassurance now pulsed with something different. Anger, hurt, years of restrained words standing like ghosts between them. He turned slowly. Jimin stood at the far end of the hallway, shirt wrinkled, hair unstyled, eyes swollen from lack of sleep or maybe from crying. Jungkook couldn't tell anymore. He used to be able to read Jimin like a map, but now every expression felt like a cipher coded in disappointment and confusion. You want me to say it? Jungkook asked, voice low but venom-laced. Fine. He walked toward him, footsteps slow, deliberate, predatory, in the way only betrayal can be when wrapped in concern. You think I'm obsessed with control? That I can't let you breathe unless I'm standing right behind you? You think all this time I've been trying to dominate you? Suffocate you? Jimin's jaw clenched. You said it yourself yesterday. You didn't know what to do when I broke down. You panicked, and instead of asking, you decided for me. Because you wouldn't talk. Jungkook's voice cracked open like a wound. You shut down, disappeared into yourself. What was I supposed to do? Just watch you drown? Yes, Jimin screamed back. Yes, if that's what I needed to survive in my way. You don't get to hijack my pain just because you can't stand feeling helpless. They were close now. Too close. Breaths mingling, heartbeats pounding like drums in war. Their voices had escalated from quiet devastation to thunderous confession, each word a nail in a coffin that neither wanted to finish building. You think I haven't hurt too? Jungkook spat. You think every time you walked past me like I didn't exist, it didn't kill me? Jimin's eyes burned. I walked past you because looking at you reminded me of everything I'd lost, and I hate that you made yourself the face of my recovery. I never asked for that, Jungkook shouted. You didn't have to. You wore it like a badge. Look at me, I'm the good one. I'm holding him together. It wasn't support, it was a leash. A door opened down the hall. Staff. Taehyung. Someone. They froze at the sight, but no one dared interrupt. The weight in the hallway was unbearable, sacred in its own awful way. Like witnessing a fire, but knowing water would ruin what needed to burn. Jungkook's voice softened, but the fire didn't dim. Do you remember the night after Busan? When we stayed on the balcony till dawn? Jimin flinched. I told you everything, Jungkook said, eyes glassy. About my fear, my doubts, the pressure. You were the only one I trusted with it. And do you know what you did the next morning? You left. No note. No explanation. Jimin's lips trembled. I was scared. And I wasn't? Jungkook asked, wounded. You ran, Jimin. You always run. From me, from yourself, from anything that feels too real. Jimin's voice cracked like porcelain. Because real things break. Silence bloomed like blood between them. For the first time, neither had words. You kissed me that night, Jungkook said suddenly. The hallway seemed to shiver. Jimin blinked. You said it didn't mean anything, Jungkook continued, voice trembling. But it did, and I let it not mean anything, because I thought that's what you needed. Jimin stepped back, visibly shaking. Why are you bringing that up now? Because I'm tired of pretending, Jungkook said. Tired of burying every part of myself to make you comfortable. You think this is about a kiss? Jimin scoffed. That night was the only time you let me in, Jungkook interrupted. And then you built walls twice as high. Tears brimmed in Jimin's eyes. Because I knew I couldn't survive it again. You don't get it, do you? You look at me like I'm yours. Like I'll always belong to you. But I don't even belong to myself. Jungkook took a step closer. Then who do you belong to? I don't know, Jimin screamed. I'm still trying to figure that out. And I can't do it while living under the weight of your expectations. From down the hall, a phone camera clicked. Jungkook turned sharply. Taehyung was standing behind one of the junior producers, who had unknowingly recorded the last minute of their fight. Without a word, Taehyung snatched the phone, deleted the video, and stared coldly at the trembling assistant. You didn't see this, he said flatly. You didn't hear anything. The assistant nodded quickly and fled. Jimin dropped to his knees. The sky above Seoul was an ominous bruise of violet and gray. Like it too had been holding in tears, it couldn't explain. Rain drizzled down the floor-to-ceiling windows of the HY rooftop studio, casting thin, trembling lines like veins across the glass. Inside, the air was cold, sterile. The room was empty, save for one folding chair positioned near the center of the polished wooden floor. On that chair sat Jimin, his legs crossed, arms folded tightly, a gray hoodie draped over his frame like a barrier more than a comfort. The door creaked. He didn't look. He didn't need to. He already knew it was Jungkook. Jungkook's steps were cautious but not weak. He entered like a man walking back into a place where something sacred had died but not yet been buried. The echo of his boots against the floor was oddly ceremonial, like thunder approaching after too long a silence. He paused 10 feet away, swallowed, and cleared his throat. You came. Jimin didn't look up. You invited me. I didn't think you'd say yes. I didn't, Jimin replied sharply. I just didn't say no. Jungkook's jaw clenched, but he didn't retort. Instead, he walked toward the opposite corner of the room and pulled out another chair from behind the upright piano. He dragged it, not lifted it, so it made a low, scraping sound across the floor. A sound that felt almost deliberate. He sat, facing Jimin from across a chasm that looked small on the floor plan but infinite in the heart. A silence stretched between them, not awkward but taut, like a wire ready to snap. Jimin finally glanced up, his voice low and crackling. You want to talk. So talk. Jungkook looked at him, really looked at him. At the shadows under his eyes, at the guarded set of his mouth, at the way his fingers were tapping, his knee nervous, defensive. I've been seeing a therapist, Jungkook said suddenly. Jimin blinked. Jungkook let the words hang there. I didn't know where else to start, he said softer now. So I figured, maybe there. I've been trying to understand why I held on so tightly to you. Why I couldn't just let you breathe. Why your silence always felt like rejection to me. Jimin said nothing, but the tapping stopped. I used to think I needed to be strong for everyone, Jungkook continued. The perfect member, the anchor, the one who never cracked. But then you cracked, and suddenly I wasn't the strongest anymore. I was just scared. Jimin's throat worked as he swallowed. And then I made the worst mistake someone in pain can make, Jungkook said, voice sharp now. I turned your pain into my responsibility. Like you were a project I could fix, instead of a person who needed space. Jimin looked at him. You don't get points for admitting that now. I'm not asking for points, Jungkook snapped. I'm asking for a chance, not to be what I was, but to be something better. Jimin stood suddenly, pacing the room. His footsteps were almost frantic, a mirror of the storm behind the glass. You want a chance? After everything? Jimin barked. You think saying I've been in therapy suddenly absolves you of years of emotional suffocation? You think I forgot what it felt like to perform next to you, feeling like a puppet in your shadow while the world praised you for protecting me? I didn't ask for praise, Jungkook fired back. No, Jimin said, spinning around, eyes ablaze. But you didn't reject it either, did you? You didn't correct them when they said I was the weak one and you were the glue holding us together. Jungkook stood too, his voice rising. Because I was trying to hold us together. At what cost? Jimin screamed. The thunder outside cracked in agreement. You never even asked what I wanted, Jungkook, Jimin said. Quieter now, but no less dangerous. You made choices for both of us and called it love. You turned your fear into my prison, and then you had the audacity to tell me I should be grateful for it. Jungkook stepped forward, breathing hard. That's not true. It is, Jimin hissed, and you know it. They stood inches apart now, breaths colliding, eyes locked like two hurricanes crashing mid-sky. I hated you, Jimin whispered. I hated waking up and knowing we had to smile in front of fans like we weren't two strangers barely tolerating each other. I hated how my heart clenched every time you stood too close, because I didn't know if you were about to protect me or consume me. Jungkook's face crumbled. He took a step back, chest heaving. You said you wanted to start over, Jimin said, stepping forward. But I haven't even forgiven you yet. I haven't even decided if I can. I'm not asking you to, Jungkook replied, voice barely above a whisper. I'm just asking you not to walk away before we even try. Jimin laughed bitterly. We've tried, Jungkook, for years. We just never called it what it really was. A slow-motion car crash. Jungkook nodded slowly. Then let's stop crashing. Let's stop pretending we're okay and start being honest, even if it's ugly. Even if it means walking into a room like this and admitting every awful thing we've done to each other. Jimin walked over to the window, watching the rain smear the city into blurry lights. I don't know if I still love you, he said after a long pause. Jungkook didn't respond. And I don't know if I ever want to again. Still, no response. But I came, Jimin said, turning around. I showed up. That's all I have right now. Jungkook nodded, his voice cracking. Then that's enough. They sat in silence again, but it was different now. Not silence of avoidance, but the silence of two people finally hearing the echoes of everything they'd refused to say. Outside, the storm began to break. A weak sun filtered through the clouds, painting streaks of pale gold across the studio floor. Jungkook looked at Jimin. Jimin looked back. For the first time in what felt like years, neither of them looked away. Not to rekindle, not to rebuild something broken, but simply to acknowledge the truth. And sometimes that's the only foundation strong enough to start again. Even if it hurts, even if it takes time, even if the road ahead is still shrouded in fog. Because the worst fights don't end with apologies. They end when both people finally decide to stop speaking through their wounds and start listening through their pain. And they had finally begun. Are you really going to say all that and still pretend you didn't love me? The question came out of nowhere. It was like a trap door yanked open beneath Jungkook's feet while he was still finding balance again. They weren't yelling anymore. No fists in their voices, just quiet landmines disguised as conversation. Jimin didn't look at him as he asked. He was sitting on the far end of the recording booth, legs stretched out in front of him, socked feet crossed at the ankle, chin tilted upward like he was challenging the ceiling to collapse. He had that look on his face again, the one that made Jungkook feel like he was 5 steps behind in a game he never asked to play. Jungkook didn't answer right away, because how do you answer a question like that without setting everything on fire again? His fingers grazed the edge of the table. He wasn't even sure why he'd followed Jimin here. Maybe because the silence after their rooftop confrontation was too quiet. Maybe because not knowing what they were now hurt more than knowing it was broken. Maybe because part of him still believed that when Jimin asked hard questions, it meant he hadn't given up yet. Jungkook inhaled slowly. I never pretended. Jimin scoffed without moving his face. You're always pretending, Jungkook. You even lie to yourself. Jungkook bristled. And what about you? You buried everything until it came out as rage. I touched your wrist and you screamed like I hit you. Jimin's body tensed, the memory punching the air out of the room. He sat up slowly, the softness draining from his posture. You don't get to weaponize that, he said, voice dangerously low. I'm not weaponizing it, Jungkook said quickly. I'm trying to understand how we got here. You know exactly how we got here. No, Jungkook bit out, standing. I know how you think we got here, but I want your words. Not your walkouts, not your sarcasm, not your passive-aggressive cryptic bullshit. Just tell me. Jimin stared at him. Really stared. You want the truth? I do. Fine, Jimin said, standing. You want to know what it felt like? It felt like being drowned by someone who swore they were pulling you to safety. Every time I tried to breathe, you gave me more of you. Your protection, your worry, your love, until I couldn't see where you ended, and I began. Jungkook's throat closed, but he kept his gaze steady. I stopped feeling like a person, Jimin said, taking a step forward. I became a project, your burden, your purpose. I couldn't even cry without thinking, how is this making him feel? And when I was numb, you panicked like my silence was a failure of yours, not a cry for help from me. Jungkook flinched. I didn't know. I know you didn't, Jimin snapped. That's the problem. Jungkook's voice cracked. I thought I was loving you. You were, Jimin said, eyes glinting. But it was a love soaked in fear and guilt and savior complexes. You thought loving me meant fixing me. That if I was broken, it reflected on you. Jungkook's fists clenched. And you never said anything. You let it happen. What would have changed? Jimin shouted. You'd cry, blame yourself harder, and double down. You never wanted honesty. You wanted reassurance. Jungkook felt the breath rip from his lungs. That's not fair. It's not supposed to be. He turned away then, as if the weight of his own words had exhausted him. The air in the booth felt thinner than usual. Jungkook sat back down slowly. So, you hated me? No, Jimin said instantly, spinning to face him. Don't twist this. I never hated you. I hated what we became. I hated who I turned into around you. I hated that I didn't know how to say stop without feeling like I'd be letting you down. Then why stay? Because I loved you too, Jimin whispered. It was the quietest thing in the room, and yet it screamed the loudest. Jungkook felt his chest twist, like his heart had teeth and was chewing its way out of him. Do you still? I don't know, Jimin said. And that's worse. Jungkook nodded, pressing his hands into his eyes. You said you wanted to start over. But what does that even look like now? Jimin shrugged. Maybe it doesn't mean going back. Maybe it means actually starting over, from scratch. Strangers with too much shared history. That sounds painful. Everything real is. A silence fell, heavy but somehow less suffocating. Then, suddenly, the door burst open. Yoongi stepped in, hair damp from the rain, phone in hand, looking furious. Someone leaked the therapist receipts. Jimin froze. What? Photos, Yoongi hissed. Of your schedule, your name, your session times. You too, Jungkook. Jungkook stood. From who? My guess? Internal. Maybe even Hybe. Jimin's face drained of color. Why now? Yoongi's gaze softened. Because the press found out about the kiss. Silence. The kind that sucks all oxygen from the lungs. Jimin sat down like someone had shot him in the stomach. No names, Yoongi added. But enough clues. They're tearing you apart online. Jungkook looked like he'd swallowed fire. That kiss was years ago, Jimin muttered. But the fight was weeks ago. The video, the rehearsal, the scream, the therapy leak. The timeline's perfect for a scandal. Yoongi's voice lowered. They're saying it was a lover's spat, that you had a secret relationship and it exploded. Fans are picking sides. Ships are trending. Someone's capitalizing on the chaos. Jimin laughed bitterly. Perfect. Yoongi stepped closer. You need to get ahead of this. Jungkook nodded. A statement? No, Jimin said firmly. No statements, no denials, no apologies. Jungkook blinked. What? Jimin stood. I'm done hiding. I'm done shaping my life around the image people want. So you're confirming it? Yoongi asked. I'm not confirming anything, Jimin said. I'm telling our truth, not theirs. Yoongi nodded slowly. Okay, then you both do it together. Jungkook and Jimin locked eyes. "Are we ready for that?" Jungkook asked. Jimin hesitated. Then, "No, but I'm done letting fear decide." Hours later, the live broadcast began. Millions tuned in. 2 chairs, 1 mic between them. No script, no company interference. Jungkook spoke first. "We know you've seen the footage, the leaks, the headlines." Jimin added, "You've heard 1,000 versions of the truth, but only 2 people really lived it, and we're sitting right here." Jungkook looked at him. "So, let's talk about it." They didn't sugarcoat. They didn't deny the kiss. They didn't confirm a romantic relationship either. What they confirmed was pain, healing, miscommunication, misplaced love. They talked about therapy, about trauma, about the danger of turning someone into your reason for being. They talked about control, about silence, about the violence of good intentions. And through it all, their voices trembled, but they never looked away. By the end, no one was trending. No one was canceled. They were simply human. Jimin closed the stream with a quiet sentence. "We're not role models. We're not perfect. We're just trying." And then they ended the call. No outro. No PR spin. Just the sound of 2 ex-lovers. Maybe still friends. Definitely still hurting. Trying to exist outside the box the world had stuffed them into. After the stream, they sat in silence. And for the first time, it felt like peace. Not reconciliation. Not resolution. But the calm that comes after a storm finally speaks its name. Jungkook turned to Jimin. "So, now what?" Jimin smiled faintly. "Now, we rest." And under the fading stormlight, they did. Together, but not entangled. Close, but not confused. Still fractured. Still finding their way. But no longer bleeding in the dark. The hotel room wasn't particularly extravagant, but it had floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city like a bleeding painting, lights flickering against the night sky like stars trying too hard to impress. Inside, it was quiet. Too quiet for 2 people who had just detonated a bomb on livestream watched by over 8 million people. Jungkook sat on the edge of the bed, still in his black shirt from the broadcast, chest rising and falling like he hadn't taken a full breath in days. His fingers trembled slightly, resting against his knees, while his phone buzzed relentlessly on the bedside table. He hadn't touched it since they went off the air. He couldn't bear to see what the world thought yet. The real storm wasn't in public. It was right here, in the room with him. Behind him, Jimin stood at the minibar, pouring water into a glass with the steadiness of a man holding back a flood. He handed Jungkook the glass without looking him in the eye. Jungkook took it, but didn't drink. They didn't speak. Until Jimin did. "Do you realize what just happened out there?" His voice wasn't angry. It was cold, measured, surgical. And that somehow made it 10 times worse. Jungkook nodded slowly. "Yeah, no, I don't think you do," Jimin said, pacing to the far corner of the room. "You say you wanted the truth, that you were tired of hiding, but the truth wasn't yours alone. It was ours, and you still spoke like you were the only one bleeding." Jungkook looked up, startled. "I thought we agreed." "You thought, Jungkook," Jimin snapped, finally turning to face him. "You always think. For both of us. And I'm sick of being the echo in your monologue." "That's not fair." "Fair?" Jimin laughed bitterly. "You held my hand during that live stream like we were some tragic love story trying to make it through adversity. Like this was romantic. Like you were the brave one. I wasn't trying to steal the narrative." "Then why did you speak first?" Jungkook froze. "Why did you always speak first?" Jimin pressed on, stepping closer. "When reporters ask about my breakdown, you answer. When fans ask about us, you smile like it's all under control. You do the interviews. You post the safe captions. You've made yourself the narrator of my pain." "I was trying to protect you," Jungkook said through clenched teeth. "And that's the problem," Jimin snapped, jabbing his finger toward him. "You think protection looks like possession. You think being the first one to speak makes you the hero?" Jungkook stood abruptly, the chair leg scraping against the floor. "I never said I was the hero. I've owned my mistakes. I stood beside you and told the world we were flawed. We were trying—" "No," Jimin cut in, voice suddenly cracking. You told the world you were trying. I just happened to be in the frame. The accusation hit Jungkook harder than any shout ever could. Jimin kept going, voice rising now, throat tightening with every word. I watched you cry on that stream and all I could think was, why does he get to be the one who hurts out loud? You broke me in private. You ignored the signs. You made me feel like I was crumbling beneath a weight I never asked to carry. And now the world is calling you brave for admitting it? Tears stung Jungkook's eyes. What do you want me to do, Jimin? You want me to disappear? I want you to understand, Jimin shouted. I want you to see me, not as your guilt, not as your past, not as your F-King redemption arc me. Jungkook's hands curled into fists. I do see you. No, you see what you need me to be, Jimin said. You see a version of me that lets you sleep at night, not the one who woke up every morning wondering if he'd survive your kindness. Jungkook flinched. You think you're kind, Jimin said, softer now, voice trembling. But kindness without listening is just control wearing a mask. I loved you, Jungkook whispered. I still do. Jimin shook his head. Then why did it feel like a cage? A long, painful silence filled the room, pressing down on their lungs like gravity had turned vindictive. Jungkook sat back down. His voice was barely audible. What do we do now? Jimin turned away, wiping his eyes with the heel of his palm. You rest. I rest. And we stop acting like healing means we have to hold hands. The words hung in the air like ash. Then Jimin spoke again, softer. You remember when we wrote that song in Tokyo? The one we never released? Jungkook blinked. Yeah. It was the only time I felt like we were equals. Jungkook looked up. I want that back, Jimin said. Not us. Not the romance. Just that moment, when I wasn't your project. I was your partner. Jungkook nodded slowly, pain etched across his face. Okay. I'll write something tonight, Jimin said, walking toward the door. Send it to you tomorrow. Jimin stopped, hand on the knob. I never meant to make you the villain, Jungkook said. I know, Jimin replied. But you still did. He opened the door, paused, and looked over his shoulder. And don't worry, I won't tell anyone that the hero bled too. He left. Jungkook sat in the empty hotel room for hours. The city lights outside flickered. His phone kept vibrating, but he never moved. Because for the first time since everything began, he realized that sometimes love doesn't die in fire. Sometimes it suffocates under the weight of being misunderstood. And sometimes the kindest thing two people can do is let go before their hands become weapons. It was the kind of night where even the silence had weight. And even the wind outside Hybe's private recording wing felt like it was listening. The studio was dimly lit, the amber hue of the control panels glowing faintly like dying embers. Jimin sat alone at the grand piano in Studio 3, the one furthest from the entrance, tucked behind 3 layers of soundproofing and the company's highest-paid secrets. His fingers hovered over the keys, unmoving. He wasn't here to play. He was here to wait. The door creaked open behind him. Jungkook didn't say anything as he stepped in. He closed the door softly and leaned against it, arms folded across his chest. He was wearing the same hoodie from their last confrontation. It looked like it hadn't been washed, or maybe he just hadn't taken it off. That would have been like him. You didn't bring your guitar, Jimin said without turning around. Jungkook's voice was hoarse. Didn't think I'd need it. Jimin let out a dry chuckle. That's rich, considering your entire apology tour has been sung in G major. Silence. Jungkook pushed off the door and walked in slowly, eyeing the equipment that still smelled like ash from the argument they left behind. The space felt haunted, not just by echoes, but by memory, by everything they couldn't unsay and everything they never had the courage to. I watched your interview last night, Jimin said, finally pressing a key, a soft A, low and mournful. The one with the international host. With the crying and the long pause before saying, mental health is complicated. Jungkook winced. I didn't plan to, but you did it anyway, Jimin cut in. For millions of people, I thought it was the right thing to do. For them, Jimin said, turning to face him. Not for me. Jungkook's shoulders sagged. You think I did it to clear my name? Jimin stood up slowly, walking around the piano until he was face to face with him. I think you did it so you wouldn't have to look me in the eye and say the same words without applause waiting at the end. I'm sorry, Jungkook said immediately, too quickly. No, Jimin snapped. You don't get to do that here. Not like that. Say it like it matters. Like no one's watching. Like you're not performing. Jungkook swallowed. His voice was quieter now. I'm sorry I made your pain about me. I'm sorry I talked louder than you could breathe. I'm sorry I forced my love into your lungs and then got angry when you choked on it. Jimin blinked. Once. Then again, but didn't interrupt. I'm sorry for all the times I called it love when it was really fear, Jungkook continued. Fear of losing you. Fear of losing control. Fear of being alone without a purpose. Jimin's voice trembled. Why now? Because I didn't realize, until you walked out that night, that I'd made you into my mirror, instead of your own person. They stood there in silence. The quiet was sharp-edged, surgical, like it could cut through everything left unspoken if they stood in it long enough. Jimin finally nodded. Thank you. Jungkook waited, but nothing followed. No forgiveness, no warmth, just the cool, hard truth. You're not going to say it back? He asked, voice tight. Jimin looked at him, and this time there was no fire, just exhaustion. I don't forgive you. Jungkook flinched. Okay, but I don't hate you either, Jimin added. I'm just still bleeding. Jungkook nodded. I can wait. No, Jimin said gently. You shouldn't. That's what got us here in the first place. You waited instead of listening. You hoped I'd come around. You watched me drown, hoping I'd reach for your hand. Jungkook looked down. So what do we do now? We write, Jimin said simply, gesturing toward the setup. We make music. Not because it heals us, but because it's the only language we still speak fluently together. Jungkook slowly stepped toward the mic, adjusting the stand with mechanical precision. Jimin sat back at the piano, and without a word, began playing the progression he'd been writing for weeks. It was raw, slow, unapologetits. Jungkook's voice cracked on the first verse, but he kept going, because sometimes pain doesn't need a solution. It just needs to be sung. 3 hours later, they sat on the floor of the studio, backs against the wall, legs stretched out, a take looping quietly in the background. The chorus echoed between them. I wasn't your savior, just a ghost who wore your chains and loved you like a prison, thinking I could ease your pain. Jimin didn't look at him, but his voice was steady. I wanted you to suffer. Jungkook didn't flinch. I know. I wanted everyone to see you as the villain. You got what you wanted. No, Jimin said, turning finally. I didn't, because it didn't make me feel better. It made me feel hollow. I'm sorry. Jungkook whispered again. I know. This time, Jimin didn't tell him to stop. Later, as they left the studio, Taehyung was waiting in the hallway. He said nothing, just looked at them both like a big brother trying to decide whether to hug them or slap them upside the head. You two are exhausting, he finally muttered. Jimin smiled faintly. You have no idea. As they walked past him, Jungkook glanced at Jimin and said, Want to grab food? Jimin didn't hesitate. Only if we don't talk about us. Jungkook nodded. Deal. Because sometimes surviving each other meant forgetting each other just for a meal, just for a night, just long enough to remember they were more than what broke between them. And in that small, quiet surrender, something finally began to shift. Not forgiveness, not closure, just breath. And after everything, that was more than enough to begin again. Even if they never said it out loud. The private rehearsal hall was dim, but not dark. Just dark enough to conceal old ghosts, and just bright enough to show where new ones were forming. It was nearing midnight, but no one had turned off the overhead lights. They hummed quietly, like a warning, or a pulse. Jungkook stood in the center of the empty space, barefoot, in joggers and a loose white shirt, staring at the mirror but not at himself. His reflection looked too calm, too put together, too wrong. Behind him, the door creaked. Jimin entered without knocking. His face was unreadable. His steps slow, calculated. There was no surprise in his presence. He'd been invited, but still, something about his arrival felt dangerous. Jungkook turned, nodding once. You came. Jimin didn't sit, didn't even blink. He looked straight at Jungkook with the kind of stare that stripped skin from bone. You said you had something to tell me. Say it. Jungkook hesitated. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because he didn't know how to say it without dragging them both under. It's about the leak, he said finally. The one with our schedules. The therapy records. Jimin's eyes narrowed. What about it? Jungkook exhaled, jaw tight. It wasn't Hybe. Something in the room shifted. Jimin's gaze sharpened into a weapon. What? Jungkook stepped closer. It wasn't someone from the inside. At least, not staff. Then who? Jimin asked. The words weren't just a question. They were a threat. Jungkook hesitated again, then pulled out his phone, unlocking it and showing him a screen. An email thread. Forwarded files. Digital footprints. I traced it, he said. It came from someone using my personal login, my cloud, my phone data. Jimin's breath hitched. Are you saying? I think it was my brother. Jimin blinked. Your real brother? Jungkook nodded slowly, ashamed. He had access to everything. I'd let him manage parts of my schedule. He said he wanted to help. And he sold our private records to the media? Jimin said coldly. Jungkook's voice cracked. I think he panicked. We were arguing. He said I was changing, hiding things, getting too dramatic. I think he wanted to shake things up, to punish me. Jimin didn't react at first. He just stood there, staring at Jungkook like he wasn't sure if this was real. Then, his lips parted, and what came out was softer than expected, but soaked in poison. So your brother violated my privacy, destroyed my stability, put my trauma on the front page because you couldn't draw a boundary? Jungkook looked down. I didn't know. That's not good enough. I know. Jimin walked away, pacing the edge of the room like a caged animal. He ran both hands through his hair, then stopped and turned, eyes blazing. You should have protected me. I thought I was, Jungkook said, voice thin. You were protecting your guilt, not me. Jungkook closed the distance between them, desperation pouring from every movement. I'll make it right. I'll go public. I'll expose him. You think that helps me? Jimin hissed. You think I want another scandal? Another trending topic? Jungkook's betrayal? The family sabotage? Jungkook was silent. Jimin's voice dropped to a whisper, trembling. I told you things I never told anyone. I opened wounds in that therapy room. I said things I didn't even say to my own family. And now strangers on the internet know how I disassociate, how I can't sleep without headphones, how I flinch when someone touches my back. I'm sorry, Jungkook whispered. I should have been more careful. I should have seen the signs. Jimin turned away. You never see the signs. You only see the aftermath. The silence that followed was like suffocation in slow motion. Then, Jimin laughed, a brittle, bitter sound that hurt more than any scream. You look so peaceful when you're lying. Jungkook's breath caught. I'm not lying. Aren't you? Jimin said, stepping closer. You've been lying to yourself for years. About who you are. About who we are. You say you love me, but what you really love is who you think I should be. Jungkook's jaw tensed. That's not true. Jimin's voice rose, sharp and cracking.